Converting a traditional IRA portion of a thrift savings plan to a Roth IRA might not be the best option for everyone. But if done properly and at the right time, you could see huge increases to net income into retirement. In this episode, we're going to go over some of the key points to consider before looking at a Roth conversion and show 3 strategies of when you might want to be doing this. Welcome, I'm Ed Smith, President of Valor Wealth Partners, where we're dedicated to educating federal employees on how to maximize value from their complex and often underutilized benefits. Taxes are owed on any retirement savings accounts, but you have control over when and how they're paid. One of the tools available to you is a Roth conversion. It's a little bit complex, and there's a lot of variables that are out of your control. And that's why you need to do in-depth analysis to make sure you're understanding all of the situations that could happen. Now, we don't know what's going to happen to the tax code in the future, but we know what it is today. So we have to use some of these basics to try to understand what's going to happen in the future for you and how it will affect your retirement. In my opinion, most free calculators on Roth conversions are extremely limited, and they don't use enough variables so you can get a clear picture of if a Roth conversion is good for you, or when you should be doing a Roth conversion. So I created my own calculator so I can give examples of 3 strategies so you can see if it's best for you. We'll get to those strategies near the end, but first let's take a quick look at why you should be considering a Roth IRA in the first place. We did a video that's part of this series that you can go back and look. I've provided a link at the top, so in case you want to watch that video as well. But in a quick summary, you have 3 considerations that you have to take a look at. The first one is time, and the more time, the better it is for you. The second is asset allocation. Now, a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA should have completely different allocations because of the tax ramifications. And finally, taxes. Like I said earlier, you're going to have to pay them one way or another, either now or later on in distribution. And if you can wrap your head around how this helps you, you can actually maximize either a Roth or a traditional IRA. Before you convert to a Roth IRA, there's a few key points you should understand. It's not all about the taxes you pay. There's actually other benefits you receive by doing a Roth conversion. One of those might be that you pay lower premiums on Medicare Part B and D. A lot of people don't realize that some of their Medicare premiums are based off of the income they have. And if your income is lower, you would pay lower premiums. A Roth IRA allows for this. Because you don't have required minimum distributions that you're forced to take that money out of your taxable IRA, this means that your income could be lower because you're not forced to create income. And with a lower income means lower premiums. The other thing it allows to do on a Roth IRA is you might be able to increase more of an inheritance. Now, I personally think that you should be spending it yourself and not creating large inheritances, but if that's what you want to do, this is one way to be able to do this. Another factor is your distribution rates can be higher because you're taking from tax-free money versus money that has to be taxed, and so you have to take out more money so you can live on the same dollar amount. Besides the good benefits of a Roth conversion, there are some penalties, and you should be aware of them. The 2 major penalties are the 5-year rule and being over 59 and a half. Now, both of these penalties could affect if you have a penalty on distributions from your Roth IRA. The 5-year rule says that you have to have a Roth IRA in existence for 5 years to be able to take the growth out of your money, and that being over 59 and a half is an age requirement so you don't have that penalty. Now, you can take the principal out without a penalty, but it's the growth that would have the penalty. But not all of your account is available for you to be able to have access to it. A couple of years ago, with the last tax code changes, they took away the do-over on the Roth IRA. Now, what that means is that if you did a Roth conversion earlier in the year, and then later on in the year, it wasn't tax advantage to do this, maybe the market went down or changes to income, you could actually push the money back to a traditional IRA and nobody worry about it. You could actually go all the way up till April 15th to do with a do-over. But with the last changes, they took this away. So now, once you do it, it's final. So it might be best for you to wait later in the year to do the Roth conversion versus early in the year where you don't know what all the factors are going to be. Talking about the timing, the Roth conversion has to be completed by the end of the year, by December 31st. Unlike putting money into a Roth IRA, which you can do up until you file taxes generally around April 15th, you have to do this by the end of the calendar year. The last key point is about taxes. Now, I don't know where the tax code is going to be going and what changes are going to be made, but we've been doing a lot of spending in this country, and it seems practical that taxes are going to go up. And I always like to pay taxes at the lowest rate. So you have to really be educated to make sure you understand what you're doing with a Roth conversion and when you want to pay taxes. I mentioned earlier that I was going to share 3 strategies of when a Roth conversion might be in your best interest. Well, we're at that point. But before I do, real quickly, these are just examples. We don't know what the true rates of return are going to be, the tax code, or even increases to your income. So please use these 3 strategies as a way to think of the possibilities that you could implement on your own personal investment strategies. I wanted to be as clear as possible, so I have footnotes at the bottom of every example. I also understand that it's very hard to read something even on a big screen. So I've included these footnotes in the description section so you can look a little bit closer at what each example is. But for most of these examples, we're using a GS13 Step 5. For those of you that aren't feds or don't want to look up what that number is, it's a little over $90,000. We're also using an investment vehicle of $250,000. Now, I'm not saying this is all of your traditional IRA or all of your TSP. It's a portion of it, or could be a portion of it. We're using $250,000 as an example. We also have to use some other assumptions about rates of return and distributions. Generally, we use a 4% distribution rate, and we use different rates to compare on different things. Such as I talked about before, your asset allocation being different between a traditional and a Roth IRA. You should have more aggressive investments in a Roth IRA because of the tax status. Meanwhile, a traditional IRA might have a lower rate of return. But I try to be as fair as possible, understanding that to maximize a Roth after you've done a conversion, you need to be more aggressive. You also want to be looking at situations where you might be in a higher tax bracket. Things that could cause a higher tax bracket could be that as a federal employee, you get pension money, which could be very high, and add on top of that Social Security income. So you're already at a good income level, and this is money after that, which could cause you to be in a higher tax bracket in retirement. But again, we don't know everybody's unique situation, so we have to look at how this applies to you, or you have to look at how this applies to you personally. In the first strategy, we're going to be looking at doing a Roth conversion in retirement. Now, like I said, it's a $250,000 portion that we're going to do on the conversion. And from this graph, you can see that the Roth component brings in a lot more income. Almost $60,000 in income compared to just under $37,000. That is a good amount of money. Now, when we're looking at these numbers, they are both net, meaning after-tax numbers. So in the traditional IRA, we had to pay the taxes after the distribution, but in the Roth IRA, we paid them when we did the conversion. The growth from that point was really good, as you can see, as the red line increased a lot higher than the blue. The second strategy we want to talk about is taking advantage of the marginal tax bracket sweet spots. Now, there's 2 sweet spots in the federal code. The first one goes from the 10 to 12% tax brackets, and the next one goes from the 22 to 24. Now, there's only 2% difference between those two, so we can actually use them interchangeably. There isn't that much of an increase in taxes. But at the 12% tax bracket, you would actually jump up 10% to get to the 22. That is something you should not be doing, and you want to stay under that 22% bracket to stay in that sweet spot right before it. And in the second one, it goes from 24 to 32. Now, this is an 8% increase in the taxes. Again, you don't want to have that jump. you want to stay in the 24% level. So if you're somewhere between the 22 to 24, stay in that level. If you're between 10 and 12, stay in that level. But take advantage of some of the excess capacity you have. So if you're in those areas, you might have another $50,000 or more that you can do before you have that huge jump in taxes. And that's how we take advantage of these sweet spots. When we look at the numbers, they're staggering. But how does one get 4 times the net income in a Roth IRA compared to the traditional IRA? Well, if we think back to early in this video, I talked about 3 considerations, and one of them was time. With a good amount of time, you can have a huge difference in income levels. And that's what we've done in this example. We've started off at a 35-year-old and taking advantage of those sweet spots in the first couple years in doing that conversion. Now, you can't do a conversion while you're 35 in the TSP. But what you can do is convert a spouse's IRA or a previous employer's IRA, and you can do the conversion at that point. Now, I did not put into these examples the amount of contributions you can do. I left that off because I wanted to try to be able to show you just what the conversion could do and not the extra money that you could add. But I have done the calculations, and they are off the charts of how much money you can do if you actually make use of these sweet spots and take advantage of new contributions going into the Roth component. Now, the matching will go into the traditional, but at least you're taking advantage of the Roth the best you possibly can. The third and final strategy is taking advantage of a market crash. Now, as you can see in this chart, I'm showing the account values instead of the income benefits. We'll get to the income in a second, but I really want to show you what this looks like when you're taking advantage of this crash. What you would do is do a conversion of a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA when the market is at its low point. What this does is that you pay lower taxes because the account value is lower at that point. So because you pay less taxes at this point, the growth is going to be tax-free on the Roth IRA, where the traditional IRA, when it recovers and then goes up a lot higher, you're going to pay a lot more taxes because you've paid the taxes on that growth. Now, in this example, you're up to about $9 million versus just over $6 million. So there is substantial growth. We could actually cut this down, but again, we're starting at the 35-year-old because time is a huge factor when you're looking at taking advantage of a Roth IRA. Now, you can't do a Roth conversion inside a thrift savings plan. They would have to be outside assets, like assets that you've had from a previous employer or from a spouse. But they're part of the conversation and part of the strategies you need to be able to look at if you're thinking about doing a Roth conversion. One of the other things I looked at when I was doing this is that you, again, want to maximize the asset allocation. The asset allocation for the traditional IRA is 75% stocks and 25% bonds. And the portion that we move over to the Roth, or that we do the market crash correction, is we're actually back down the risk to a 25% stock and 75% bond before. Basically, this person believes that the market is about to crash, so they start making their assets a little bit more conservative. By being more conservative, you have less of a crash in the scenario. And then once it crashes, you want to put everything into the stock because you have tax-free growth. Again, this is a portion of your overall portfolio, and you probably have assets someplace else. Maybe you have other types of assets than the thrift savings plan, or in your thrift savings plan that you can balance off some of this growth. Let's take a look at the income that this generates. As we can see from this charts, the red line, or the Roth, has done an extremely better job, almost double what you would have had in the traditional portfolio. Again, time is a big factor, but you can look at it at shorter periods of time as well. In summary, I hope you've seen that if you understand how your thrift savings plan fits into your overall tax strategies, you could take advantage of many different tools available for you. But to do that, you have to have good analysis of what the possibilities are and how to execute them. As always, I hope you get the best advice for you and your family through conflict-free, unbiased advice. Thank you, and I look forward to the next video when we share more of our thoughts on how to be taking advantage of your federal benefits.